Hi, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending where in the world you are joining us from today. My name is Rosalie Olmsted. I am WESA's Executive Assistant. It is an honor to have you all here today with WESA's strategic partner, Leidos, and Joe Justice. But before I turn it over to Joe, I'd like to give you a quick overview of the WESA's organization. We often go by our acronym WESIS because that is exactly what we are, a global cyber sisterhood. WESIS is a 501c3 nonprofit organization with a mission to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity. Our community is made up of over 10,000 members in over 90 countries. We have 70 professional affiliates and over 270 student chapters around the world. We offer a variety of initiatives and skill development training programs, scholarships, our annual conference, leadership series, and our Job Board Plus Plus. We owe all of our wonderful initiatives to all of our strategic partners who fund us year round. We would like to say a special thanks to our Tier 1 strategic partners being Akamai, Amazon, Bloomberg, Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute, Cisco, Ford, Google, Lockheed Martin, Microsoft, Optum, Sandia National Labs, and SentinelOne. Please do not forget to ask questions throughout the webinar today. If you have any questions, drop them in the questions box below, and if time permits, we will get to them during the Q&A session at the end. And lastly, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to the WESIS newsletter. You can find it at wesis.org in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Justice with Leidos.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rosalie. Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be presenting here today. A huge thank you to WESIS for your amazing strategic partnership, for hosting us, and for the great work that you do for women in cybersecurity. As mentioned, my name is Joe Justice, and I am a Business Information Security Officer for Leidos. And for those of you that are not familiar with Leidos, we are a Fortune 500 innovative technology organization with over 48,000 employees supporting challenges in national security and the health industry. So who is this webinar for? It's basically designed for those of you who are looking to maybe start their journey into the cloud security space, or you just want to gain some foundational knowledge on essential cloud computing and cloud security practices in your day job. You could be an IT administrator, you can be a network administrator, engineer, whatever it may be. You just want foundational skill sets or foundational knowledge on cloud computing and cloud security purposes or practices. So with that, we will jump into today's webinar of Cloud Security Essentials. Okay, today's journey. We will talk a little bit about myself, and I will share a little bit about my background. We will discuss foundational concepts and components of cloud computing, because you can't secure the cloud without having the core knowledge of cloud computing. So before diving into securing the cloud, we'll first spend a little time understanding what the cloud actually is. My goal is to keep things pretty high level. We only have an hour, but I hope I can provide you with some insights during the time that you spend with me today. Cloud security is a huge topic. It's vast, it's complex. So while this is not an advanced webinar, it will focus on some of the core principles and best security practices. What next? So Joe, I have taken this webinar, and now what? We'll talk about some of the things that you can do to expand and then build upon the knowledge shared here today if you want to focus on or dive deeper into cloud security. All right, Joe Justice, about me. As you can see, it's taking a minute to come up here. Here you go. As you can see, here I am a business information security officer at Leidos, as I mentioned before. In this role, I drive execution of information security policies and cyber risk management activities across the business sectors within Leidos. I've been with the organization for over 12 years and have over 25 years of experience in the IT industry. Along the way, I've invested in myself. That's something I truly believe in for everyone, and earned several certifications from different organizations, as you can see in the upper right, under certifications. Currently, I'm in my final semester pursuing my Master's of Science in Cybersecurity and Information Assurance. Yay. I am a strong proponent of continuous self-development. So when I started at Leidos, it was my first full-time role in cybersecurity. And I applied for so many jobs trying to break into the space. And Leidos was the one organization that called me back. And I've been there ever since, building my skill sets and elevating my experience and my position, which has led me into the role I'm in today. Favorite quote of mine is by Peter McWilliams. Be willing to be uncomfortable. Be comfortable being uncomfortable. Say that 5 times. I truly believe that growth happens when we push ourselves beyond our comfort zones. That's how we grow. That's how we learn. As far as affiliations, you can see in the lower left, those are some of the affiliations I am passionate about, that I align strongly with. And hobbies, as you can see, I do not have many. However, mentorship, giving back to the community, and growing my career are strong passions of mine. Okay, cloud computing. Let's get to it. I'm not going to make the assumption that we all know what the general definition of cloud computing is. If by chance you do not, here are 2 excellent sources for definitions of cloud computing. One is from NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the other is ISO-IEC, which is the International Organization for Standardization and the International Electrotechnical Commission. They are 2 great reference points if you want to dive a little deeper into the official definition of cloud computing. But essentially, it is the delivery of computing services across the internet. These services can be servers, storage, databases, software analytics, serverless computing, edge computing, just to name a few. You have, with cloud computing, you have basically systems running on hypervisor clusters in a multi or single tenancy or multi-customer environment. And it can be an organization's own on-prem private cloud where their customers are their employees, or it can be a cloud or in the cloud with some of your mainstream players like AWS, Azure, Oracle, etc. This diagram here reflects just a handful of the mainstream cloud service providers that are out there. Don't get me wrong, there are many out there, but these are some of your big players. Okay. Key characteristics of cloud computing. When we talk about cloud computing, there are multiple characteristics that must be present for a service offering to be considered cloud. These are the 5 attributes that NIST defines as defining a environment that's basically cloud or cloud computing environment. Broad network access. Essentially, they're your cloud services available to you over the internet. You can access them from any location that has an internet connection. Broadband network access is also device independent, which means you can access the cloud or the cloud services or your cloud services from a desktop, phones, an Internet of Thing or IoT devices. So being able to having the ability to access services and data from anywhere with any device obviously enhances remote collaboration. And there are other characteristics, but these are just some of the main ones. And of course, your corporate policy would need to support this policy. But the capability is there. There's a lot that you can do since this has been introduced to the public. Examples of broad network access would be things like web-based applications, virtual desktops, which is like your remote desktop computing environment, and cloud storage, Dropbox, OneDrive, things like that. You also have on-demand service. Now, that allows the consumer to provision resources on an as-needed basis. This typically occurs with not much assistance or help from the cloud service provider. When we talk about provisioning resources, this could be deploying deploying virtual machines within a cloud platform. It could also mean scaling your resources out, say if you want to add a server to a server farm. On-demand services also gives you as a customer or the user autonomy because it empowers you or the customer to manage their own resources based on their needs and their requirements as they need them. Resource pooling. With resource pooling, the CSP allocates resources across multiple customers based on their needs. So they can allocate things like storage and processing power, network bandwidth, memory to support multiple customers or tenants simultaneously. So one of the things to note is that resource pooling and multi-tenancy kind of go hand in hand. With the multi-tenancy, customers share the same physical infrastructure, but their data and their workloads should be isolated. So if they're not, then that's a problem. So this makes it, of course, transparent to the customer. So they feel like this is just their own isolated environment. You also have metered service. With metered services, almost everything you perform within the cloud is metered. This way, you're charged precisely for the services that you use, no more, no less. So it's pretty transparent to the customer. Elasticity allows the customer to grow and shrink their IT footprint as needed based on their demand. So if they need to add additional resources like storage or network capacity, they can. And this is what makes it more cost efficient because you're only purchasing resources when you need them and you only pay for what you use, which essentially reduces overhead costs from an infrastructure perspective. Cloud deployment models. So cloud deployment define how the cloud services are hosted, who controls them, and what cloud customer consumes them. So with public cloud deployment models, the cloud infrastructure is available to the general public. It can be owned by a private organization, the government, a cloud service provider, a community. It just depends on how the deployment model is deployed and configured. With private clouds, the cloud infrastructure is solely used by a single organization. It can be managed by that organization or a third party. One of the things to note with a private cloud is that many organizations leverage them for enhanced security practices and compliance with data privacy regulations. So, for example, if you have a highly regulated industry, there are probably going to be customers, customers within that industry may want to or want the convenience and features of cloud, but they don't want their data commingled with other customers' data. So also with private clouds, you have an increased level of ownership and a high level of system and data control. But with that becomes a higher amount of responsibility. So you're responsible for more. Another thing to note with private clouds is that many virtual private clouds can be created in a public cloud. Our virtual private cloud is like your AWS VPCs, for example. Another thing to take note with private clouds, say for instance, your private cloud is in a public cloud, but say you're a government contractor and you have to have a gov cloud or a more secure FedRAMP tenant. As opposed to being within that public cloud. That's something that you, as a practitioner, would work with the cloud professional, or not cloud professional, but cloud service provider on. With a community cloud, the cloud infrastructure is shared across a community of consumers with, they typically have like a common mission or goal. This could be your universities or online gaming community. Then you have your hybrid deployment model. You are generally combining 2 or more deployment models. So, for example, kind of similar to what I discussed earlier, you have an organization that may want to leverage a public cloud for commercial or their commercial side of the business, and private cloud for compliance purposes or internal employees. It just depends on what the business requirements and needs and regulations are. These are very common, by the way. With multi-cloud, you utilize multiple cloud services from different providers. This is where you are enabled to leverage redundancy because you are using different cloud providers, and it minimizes vendor lock-in, which is basically, how can I describe that? It's if you go to a cloud service provider and you are using some proprietary tools, if there comes a point where you have to export your data through that tool because you want to leave this cloud service provider and go to another, you may run into some complications. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, cloud service delivery models. I know this is probably, for those of you that are new, it's a lot of information. So, and we only have so much time to pack everything in. But it's definitely things that you need to know. It's definitely the foundation and the core as you start to build up on and get more into cloud security or other aspects of cloud. So infrastructure as a service, IaaS, that delivers virtualized computing resourcing over the internet. It's where your infrastructure lives. This would be your data centers, your servers, virtualization, whatever it may be. And with IaaS, your CSP is responsible for providing the hardware, storage, network infrastructure, and making those things available to you via virtualization. Sorry about that. I think my mute button went on for a second. Now, as a customer with this service delivery model, you have the most control over your resources. So you have to think about it. You have to balance things out and understand. It's very, very, very important that you understand what your business requirements are, because, you know, while this provides you with the flexibility, the most flexibility for the customer, it also requires the most administrative support. So you're going to have to make sure you have that skill set to support infrastructure as a service model. When it comes to platform as a service, PaaS, that's your platform for development and deployment, and it's where your developers function. With PaaS, your CSP is responsible for the infrastructure, compute and storage, networking, virtualization, as well as the operating system, because everything that runs on top of the OS is the responsibility of the developer. So as a developer, all I want to do is code. I don't want to have to worry about patching, right? I don't want to have to worry about vulnerability management as it relates to the OS and underlying infrastructure. So I just want to develop and deploy my code, and that's where platform as a service come in. So then moving on to SaaS, that's basically your software delivered over the internet. So think M365. Knowing what service model, kind of going back to the business requirement statement, is necessary is critical when evaluating your cloud solution, because there are a lot of costs involved, you know, when you're leveraging infrastructure as a service, for example, compared to purchasing an application, or, you know, housing that application through a SaaS. Now, there are other delivery models and what now out there, but one other one that I don't have on this slide is function as a service, and that's what provides your serverless computing environment. So when you think about serverless, you think about using things like Docker. And from a security perspective, when you get into function as a service or serverless computing, you want to consider API security and monitoring logging as well. And we're going to talk a little bit about those things later on when we get into the security aspect of things. This reference here is a NIST cloud computing reference architecture. So the little definitions that are here, I added those just to kind of give you a definition of what each of the core actors are. Cloud consumer, we kind of talked a little bit about that. That's the individual or the organization that consumes the cloud service. So for example, you are all cloud consumers. If you have a Gmail account or you utilize Google Drive, you have some flexibility there, but, you know, in configuring those solutions, but those are still they're SaaS solutions, but you are the cloud consumer, you know, of that service. Cloud provider, obviously, is the organization that provides the cloud services to the consumers. They generally ensure security of the cloud, along with the availability and scalability as needed. And as mentioned earlier, some examples are your Amazon, your Google, Azure, Oracle, whatnot, or some of your mainstream CSPs. Cloud brokers. Now, cloud brokers manage the performance, the use, and the delivery of cloud services between the CSP and the consumer. So they're like the middleman. So an example of that would be like a CASB solution. So that's something, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the slides as well when we talk more about security. Cloud auditor, they perform audits of the cloud environment and provide audit reporting. And cloud carriers, they make reference to your ISPs or your backbone carriers. Now the fun stuff, yay. All right, I'm gonna click forward now. I'm excited. Cloud security, what is it? It's basically the practice of protecting data, applications, and infrastructure relative to cloud computing. It encompasses security measures taken both by the CSP and the consumer, which depends on the service delivery model you use. Cloud security differs from your traditional on-prem security. They both aim to protect your data, apps, and infrastructure, but the operating models are different. And the biggest difference is with the CSP, they manage the physical infrastructure. They have the data centers all over the world. They have the hardware, the networking, and some level of platform security. Whereas on-prem, you own and control everything. And if you've been in the industry for a while, you understand what I'm saying when I say you own everything, including all of the infrastructure. There are still some organizations that have full-blown data centers today because, say, for instance, they want to keep their sensitive data on-prem, right? But utilize cloud for other business cases. Migrating to the cloud definitely has its benefits. It does. But cloud environments are also increasingly being targeted by our adversaries. So knowing how to secure it is crucial. So this here is shared responsibility model. One from AWS, one from Azure, one from Google Cloud. Generally, when we talk about cloud security, you can't talk about cloud security without talking about cloud service models. We hear a lot about shared responsibility models. So with shared responsibility models, they attempt to draw that line in the sand between the CSP and the customer's responsibility as it relates to security. So keep in mind that it's going to differ based on the service model you use. So depending on the service model, your responsibilities as the consumer of the service changes. So typically, each CSP has some sort of shared responsibility model. Like I said before, these are some of your mainstreams, that I pulled from their website that they kind of share out to their customers. But know that there is no cloud service or cloud provider that will be fully responsible for security controls and requirements. If you are a cloud security professional or, the security administrator, it will be up to you to know what you can and can't control access to within your cloud environment. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this slide because I want to make sure I stay within time, but these are some of the common security or common cloud threats. You have data breaches. I noted just a sentence or two of some of the things you can do to mitigate that or reduce that risk, I'm sorry. So with data breaches, you want to make sure that you implement encryption for data at rest and data in transit. With insider threats, whether they're intentional or not, you want to regularly audit your user access, especially when it comes to sensitive data or sensitive systems, and employ principle of least privilege, which is essentially only giving a user enough permissions that they need to perform their duties. Misconfiguration, that encompasses a lot. When you think about S3, or not S3, when you think about AWS and S3 buckets, when you don't have those S3 buckets that contain your sensitive data, configured properly, you run the risk of adversaries getting that data or experiencing a data breach. So being able to leverage tools that can detect and remediate those configuration errors are good. Some cloud providers have some native tools that you can use. You actually also have CASB solutions that can scan for things like that, as well as vulnerability. Some vulnerability management tools can spot some misconfigurations as it comes to cloud service providers as well. Denial of service, that you can utilize distributed denial of service protection services from your cloud provider. Insecure APIs, that's kind of when you get into your platform as a service and your developers are developing code, you want to make sure they're developing pure code or secure code, and you're doing regular security code testing on all of the APIs, because you leverage a lot of software applications leverage API calls, and we will talk about a little bit about API security as well. Account jacking, you want to enable strong access control there, enable multi-factor authentication, which reduces your unauthorized risks, and malware attacks, just known attacks, just making sure you have not just AV solutions and keeping those updated. That's, what we know about. We have EDR solutions out there too, that can do some behavioral analysis type work based on behavior if it's not signature based, or if a threat is not signature based. So those are just some of the things that or some of the tools that you can leverage to, reduce the risk across these common cloud security threats. This is another slide. We won't talk through each of these, but I did want to reference, can't have a cloud security course or webinar without talking about the Cloud Security Alliance, CSA. These are their top threats in cloud computing that they released for 2024. In the references page at the end of this slide, I do have a link to their website, but they are basically a community-driven organization that focuses on what we're doing today, sharing knowledge about cloud security. It's a great resource, great reference point. I use it all the time. There are so many tools out there and so many things that you can leverage to build your knowledge in not only just the cloud security space, but just cloud in general. Core concepts of cloud security. These are some of the things that you want to keep in mind as not just as a cloud security professional, but an IT professional who's responsible for, administering systems or data across an organization. So, these are components and concepts you want to make sure you think about when you're thinking about securing your organization or securing the cloud. We won't talk through each of these, but just to kind of give you a high level. And as you can see down there for number 8, I have shared responsibility. That there, I probably should have moved that a little higher in the pyramid, because, you want to know what you're responsible for depending on your model. But data protection, identity management, as well as some others that are on here, but some that are not on here that you also want to think about. One that goes hand in hand with compliance standard is legal requirements, identity management, identity and access management, network security, With cloud, you use a lot of cloud services. So you have to think about those cloud service configurations. The more services and configurations you put out there, the wider your attack surface becomes. So you want to think about the security of every single service that you turn on in your environment, especially if it's internet facing. You also have third-party integrations you want to think about in securing that, and that's kind of where API security comes in. So you do a lot of REST API calls if you want to, say, download logs from AWS into your local SIEM. And then you also have backup and disaster recovery. Think about the security and patching and the updates, and also think about the location of data, because there may be sovereign requirements if, you know, a data center is in the US and you have users in the UK. So you always want to think about where the data is, and that's something, you know, you want to talk to your provider about in the beginning, as you talk through your requirements. Okay, we'll be on the slide for a few minutes here. Core concepts, or not core concepts, I'm sorry. Cloud security considerations. I'm sorry, having some issues here with the, it's a little slow here coming up on the BrightTalk side. Okay, here we go. Cloud security considerations. These are just some things to consider from a service model perspective. So keep in mind, there are many other things that are not on these slides, but it's a start. So from a SaaS perspective, when you follow the shared responsibility model, there's not a whole lot you can do when it comes to securing SaaS, but there are some things that you can do. You can ensure you have controls in place to control who can have access to your environment. These are things that can be done with IP whitelisting, machine agents or certificates, or you can leverage the Cloud Access Security Broker solution, the CASB solution. From a IAM's perspective, you can leverage roles and privileges via AD, or the native roles that typically comes with or native to your cloud service provider. You can implement data tagging and classification. And for data tagging and classification, if you have an on-prem solution already, you may be able to integrate that solution, you know, into your cloud environment. It just depends on the provider that you choose. And some of them have native tools that you can use as well. You also want to ensure that you encrypt your data at rest and in motion, and use strong encryption algorithms. And we talked about logging and monitoring earlier. That's what allows you to leverage incident response capabilities. Just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean you don't want to know about it. If your data is in the cloud and it's compromised, you want to know when that happens. And that's where your logging and monitoring capabilities come in, and you can respond to those types of incidents. Now, bear in mind, you might not have the control to implement all of these controls because it depends on the SaaS provider. For platform as a service, when you're secure, you want to focus on securing your applications, data, and you want to focus on access controls, while the provider is managing the underlying infrastructure, including the OS, and they generally handle the OS configuration and patching. There are still things that you have to do to secure your apps. You want to enforce strong IAM practices, which means using things like role-based access, which gives users and applications only the permissions they need to perform their tasking or their abilities. You also want to require multi-factor authentication, least privilege access for all users. And like I discussed earlier, with least privilege, you're granting users the minimum level of access necessary to perform their task. That, as I stated earlier, minimizes the risk of unauthorized access. You also want to ensure that your code is secure. And how you do that? Code reviews. Other things, you have other scanning tools. You can do static, dynamic scanning, through vulnerability scanning, static analysis scanning, as well as dynamic. But you definitely want to have some sort of software development lifecycle in place where you can incorporate your code reviews phase. We talked about data encryption from a SaaS perspective, but I did forget to mention key management. So with encryption, you want to make sure you use some sort of key management service to manage your encryption keys and rotate them regularly. That's a best practice. With applications, you also want to focus on application isolation, because if you're using, say, container security, and by chance one of your container images are compromised, you don't want that to spread. So you want to isolate your applications and your microservices to prevent compromise compromise that occurs in one component from happening in another. And APIs, which is your application programming interface, which is what allows your different applications to communicate and share data. So you want to ensure securing those APIs by using HTTPS and OAuth, which is your authorization framework that basically allows your applications to obtain limited access to user accounts, and it doesn't expose the credentials. You can also use what they call an API gateway that will centralize and secure all of your API traffic. Compliance and security auditing. You want to ensure that your platform as a service environment meets whatever requirement or required compliance is necessary for your organization. So you may want to conduct vulnerability assessments to identify and mitigate the risks within your applications or within your platform as a service environment. And finally, IaaS. I won't repeat the security considerations, but some of them are the same across all service models. But when it comes to securing IaaS, you are securing the virtualized infrastructure. And that means the compute, that means the storage, that means the networking. It's all software based, but you're still responsible for it. So when you're working with, say, network security, you want to make sure you isolate and segment your VPCs within your environment, because you may have to segment things based on data, based on location, based on regulations or compliance, whatever it may be. And you also want to limit your public facing services. Only turn on what's necessary. Also, you want to leverage ACLs, firewalls, and VPNs. Patch management and system updates. Ensure you're patching and updating your systems. That mitigates and protects, a good amount of known vulnerabilities. That should be a must. And when you have your 0-day events that occur, make sure you have a process already in place where you can go ahead and implement those to where you're not breaking the business. You also want to ensure that you're performing regular backups and that you have a disaster recovery plan in place. That is very crucial for whether you're on-prem or in the cloud. Those are things that, you know, each environment from a security perspective should have in place. Virtual machine security, that entails the hardening of your OSs, because remember, this is IaaS. You're responsible for everything, including securing your image. Strong access control mechanisms to the VMs. Make sure you have an incident response plan in place so you can respond to incidents in a timely manner, like we discussed before. DDoS protection, like I mentioned before, you can use something like AWS Shield, you know, if you're leveraging AWS to protect your availability of your services. Whew, that was a lot, right? I think I'm tired. I'm out of breath. I'm just joking. There is so much more. This is just a tip of the iceberg. Key takeaways. This means we're at the end, so we're doing good on time. I want to leave time for questions if there are any. Understand cloud basics. You know, it doesn't take a lot. There are many things out there on YouTube. You know, there are free things. You have, you know, paid training. At Leidos, we have upskilling programs that I use faithfully. I honestly, you know, have achieved most of my training through Leidos and their investments in me. And when you come across a organization that gives you that opportunity, take it. You are the most valuable asset that you can invest in. Same thing with deployment models. They matter. Make sure you understand the how and the whys and the what's behind it. What is it? You know, why do I need it? How do I use it? How does this benefit the organization? How does this benefit my employer? How does this satisfy the business requirements? So those are things that, you know, you need to ask yourself, you know, when you're doing when you're trying to decide deployment models. So learn about it. Same thing with service models. There are online courses out there that are free. Like I said, some that are paid for. YouTube, I'm always finding something educational on YouTube. There are a lot of great technical folks or technical professionals out there that give back to the community and just, you know, do things because they want to share their knowledge. So take advantage of those things. Certificates and certifications. Pursue relevant certifications to validate your cloud security skills. If that's the route that you want to go, do it. You know, stay relevant in the industry. And the only way you stay relevant is by growing and by learning. And mentorship, my favorite. I'm a mentor, I'm a mentee. I will always be a mentor. I will always be a mentee because you learn. It's a feedback loop. I learn from my mentees just as my mentees learn from me. And with that, these are just some of the references I use in the presentation today. And feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions about anything that I discussed, or if when we go through questions, we don't have time to get through all of the questions. I'm usually pretty good at replying. So with that, that is the end. And thank you guys so much for joining me today. I am truly humbled. Thank you, Weesis, for having me.
Joe, thank you. Spectacular presentation, and we do have a lot of questions, so I'm going to do our best so we can try to get through them. One, I just want to say thank you for your time.
You sound a little muffled, so.
Oh no.
Oh, now you sound great.
Perfect. Thank you. We did get a lot of questions, so I'm going to just start at the first ones. A big one was because there was a little bit of delay. Is there any way that we could share the slides at the end? Would you be all right if we did that?
What I will do is take them back to comms and make sure that I don't know if I have to scratch the logo out or anything like that and put them. But yes, I will definitely share these out.
Wonderful. So viewers, just a heads up, there might be a delay and the slides will be available. We'll make a goal of close of business tomorrow, reattached to this presentation. So if you're looking for those slides, we will do our best to get them uploaded and on here tomorrow after just some communications on the back end.
Okay.
And then one of the questions was pretty quick. Where are you getting your master's at?
Western Governors University.
Wonderful. And how are you enjoying that program? I know you said
Oh,
you're close to being
I
done.
love it. It is definitely challenging for me.
Mm.
It is a lot of work, but it takes commitment and dedication. So, trying to do that and keep up in the industry and work full time and be a mom, you have to have some time management skills going on. So,
Oh, yeah.
it's a lot.
It is a lot. And then this viewer just said thank you, and they were referred to a position with Leidos, a cybersecurity position, by someone they met actually at the WESIS conference in April. They read your article about your journey at Leidos, and they found you truly inspiring and gave them
Oh,
so
thank
much
you.
hope. They wanted to know if there's any guidance you can give about getting a security clearance, because that is.
Yes. So getting a security clearance, sometimes, I mean, to be honest, it's a little hard sometimes when you don't have one. But even if the job posting says that you must have one, I would say still apply for it. There are some job postings out there that will say you must be able to be cleared, like Leidos. There are some jobs that we post that says that you must have one on day one, but there are also postings that say, you have to be able to obtain a secret clearance in order to be hired. So I would say, look for those types of role postings. I didn't get my clearance until probably 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. So it was pretty difficult for me, but that didn't come until I kind of elevated in my career, and I was able to get one through Leidos through one of my new positions or positions I held previously.
Thank you. And what would be some tools that enable communication or sharing of resources in a multi-cloud environment?
Can you repeat the question for me? I'm sorry, you went out a little bit.
What tools enable communication or sharing of resources in a multi-cloud environment?
You can, I mean, you have basically your firewall rules. You're going to have that in place. That's common. And remember, everything is going to be software, right? You have API. We talked about API security, multi-cloud. You can use VPC peering. It varies depending on the vendor and the provider and what tools and what technologies they support.
Thank you. What are some of the most effective practices for securing sensitive data in a multi-cloud environment, especially when dealing with diverse data protection regulations across separate regions?
I would say encryption, you can't go wrong. Strong encryption, and bring your own keys. Meaning when you have your key management service, if you're able to supply keys for that data, that's one of the routes that I would take, and also data tagging. Right, you have to know what you have out there first, and you have to be able to label and categorize that data, so you know what type of security controls to apply to the data. It doesn't make sense to apply high security controls to data that's public, right? So that is also a mechanism you can use to secure your data in a multi-cloud environment, because you may not want your data to leave one cloud and go to another. So that's where your data tagging comes in.
Thank you. And then do security strategies differ not only based on the cloud deployment model, they're using example public, private, hybrid, multi-cloud, but also depending on whether the service is SaaS, PaaS, or IaaS. Sorry.
Yes, that is critical, and that all goes back to requirements. And sometimes it's hard when you're working day to day, in an organization sometimes, and you know. The business may need this list of things, but they may not have the requirements. And it's up to you to kind of, interview them, talk to, them understand the business, understand where they are, understand where they need to go, and then you kind of start to strategize. You may do a hybrid. You may have to, leave some things on prem because the application doesn't support cloud, or they can't put the data in the cloud. It just depends. So you have to be able to understand all of those components and determine what type of strategy you're going to apply so that you can ensure that you're deploying the right model and the right service model, deployment model and service model.
There have been a lot of questions about how to get into cybersecurity, getting with entry level jobs, and a lot specifically asking about what certifications you think would be valuable if they want to go into cloud security. Could you touch on that a little bit?
Yes, from a entry level perspective, I'm going to always say CompTIA, right?
Mm,
That and I'm speaking from my experience. I started out where I started out as entry level. We all did,
mm.
and I had no idea about anything in cyber security at all. Everything I've learned since being at Leidos, and starting with those basic security certificates or certifications like CompTIA will get it'll tickle your knowledge is what I call it. Tickle your knowledge, and it kind of makes you want a little bit more sometimes. And then you can kind of grow from there. You have a CCS SP with ISC square, but those certifications generally require certain preliminary or prerequisites, I'm sorry, like a CISSP, or a certain amount of experience in the field. It depends. So I would start, if you wanted to get into cloud, I started with the Cloud Plus on the CompTIA side. And you don't necessarily always have to get certifications. They do open doors for you. I tell people, don't get a certification just to have alphabets behind your name, right? Consume the knowledge. Take your time, understand the knowledge. That is how you become invaluable, right? And if at the end of the day, you've consumed that knowledge and you want to take the certification, hey, that's 1+ up on you. That means you're going to kill the interview when you go in, because you'll be able to think strategy. You might not be able to talk about hands-on, but you can talk about theory. You can talk about hypotheticals, right? Because that's how interviews are nowadays, right? They're panels, and they're going to ask you those things. So be prepared for that.
Wonderful. And then I'm going to just reiterate, because I'm seeing this a few times. Please feel free to connect with Jo on LinkedIn. She shared that at the beginning of the webinar if you missed it. She would love to connect, because we are unfortunately not going to be able to get to every single question. There are a lot coming in. So if we did not get to your question, please feel free to connect on LinkedIn. That will be the best way to continue the conversation. But we do have time for about one more. And I want to bring it back to one of the more technical questions, because you provided a phenomenal educational webinar. And are there any sandboxes that you can use to get hands-on experience?
Okay, so sandboxes you can use. What I tell my mentees, build your own.
Ooh.
There are things out there that are already built for you, but nothing is like building your own. But you can, get something with AWS. You can get something with Azure. They have free tiers that you can leverage and kind of build your own sandbox and kind of go from there. Right. But there are other already built sandboxes and tools and whatnot and things out there that you can leverage. But I'm always a proponent of building your own and creating your own vulnerabilities, attacking those vulnerabilities and then putting in defenses for those to see how it operates. That's how I learned.
Wonderful. Joe, I just want to say again, thank you so much for your time today, for providing this phenomenal webinar. I hope everyone has an incredible rest of their day, and thank you for joining us. And then please check back tomorrow afternoon. So on September 25th, we operate on a central time. So look in the afternoon central for the slides. So we'll hopefully have those uploaded then.
Yes, I will. I will actually get to that today. I'll go check on that now and make sure that I'm good to distribute.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Joe, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye, everyone.
Bye.